Hey, what's up, everybody? I want to show you a game today from the Gibraltar Masters. This game took place in 2011 with the white pieces Fabiano Caruana, rated 27-21 at the time, and with the black pieces Hungarian Grandmaster Richard Rapport. And I'm showing you this game because there's some subtleties and nuances that I would like to point out that could be beneficial to your chess game. So Caruana played e4, e5 from Rapport, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5. We have a Ruy Lopez, a6, and we have the not often seen exchange variation of the Ruy Lopez. The reason why you don't see it at Grandmaster level often is because of its drawish reputation. There are indeed many ways for black to claim theoretical equality in this line. And again, the emphasis is on the word theoretical because these things have to be proven by each individual player in practice. And this is a great way to avoid preparation, um, from your opponent. As you may know, there are many, many variations in the Ruy Lopez. I mean, if you open any chess openings book and look at the Ruy Lopez, I think that is the most extensive as far as the amount of theory involved. Um, and that's just coming right off the top of my head. I think it's has more theory built up than the Sicilian King's Indian defense. Ruy Lopez is up there. A lot of lines to deal with, and the exchange variation is a simple way to avoid many lines, especially after a6. Of course, black doesn't even have to play a6 here. That's how complicated the Ruy Lopez is. He can just play knight c6, and it's the beginning of your Berlin complex. But a6 is a very common move, and you have to be prepared for the closed variations of the Ruy Lopez as well as the open Ruy Lopez. So there is a lot of study if you plan on playing this variation for white. So a lot of players, to avoid deep preparation, will sometimes or just to catch their opponent off guard by presenting a rare line, will play the exchange variation. There is also the exchange variation deferred, which waits a few moves and then exchanges on c6. But in this game, we are just talking about your normal exchange variation. Now, there's many continuations after Castle. Lasker, the former world champion, used to play from this position different moves. Castle is the main theoretical move, and it's probably the best. But Lasker played knight c3, I think d3 in some games. There's a lot of flexibility here. And black's basic question that he has to answer early in this opening is how to defend the e5 pawn. And this is why you get all of these different lines emanating from the black side in this opening. f6 is one way to defend the e-pawn, but it blocks the f6 square from the knight. Right now the knight can't come here. Bishop g4, it pins the knight on f3, right? And this inadvertently, indirectly defends the e5 pawn from the knight capture. Bishop d6, directly defending the e5 pawn, but as you can see, making the bishop somewhat passive. Queen to d6, right? Queen f6, and usually these moves have the idea of castling queenside, so the queen comes out early. And usually after the queen comes out, the light square bishop will be brought out. So there's several different ways of defending the e-pawn, as you can see, and each one has its pros and cons. But theory in general says that black has a equal game. But we've seen enough of Magnus Carlsen games and other Grandmaster games to know that you can be outplayed from quote unquote theoretically equal positions. So let's continue on. Caruana played castles kingside, and Rapport decided to defend the e-pawn with queen d6. Knight a3 from Caruana. What's the idea here? It's very clear and straightforward. The idea is simply to bring the knight to c4, and now you have two pieces converging on e5 and a threat to the queen. So this double threat to the queen on d6 and the e5 pawn means that black must lose the pawn. So that's the idea. Notice also that with the queen placed on d6, that this bishop is not able to just snatch off the knight. Now there's several ways here. Bishop e6 has been played in Grandmaster games. Again, that develops a piece, right? Prepares queenside castling, and of course stops the threat for the time being. There's also b5, which has been played, which stops the threat. Of course, this commits the pawn structure, and if you look at games in this line, sometimes black gets in a little trouble by advancing this weakened structure so early in the game. So this is a move that solves the immediate threat, but you can't take pawn moves back. So it's a very committal move. The option that Rapport chose is queen e6. So he stops the threat of knight c4, and he kind of alludes to the possibility of bishop takes a3, which doubles white's pawns also on the queen side, and pretty much gives it's a quick equality to black. Just simplifies the game here. Caruana plays a very good move here. He plays b3. I like b3 because now if bishop takes a3, then he would just be giving up the bishop pair for nothing. So b3 takes the idea of bishop takes a3 right off the table. Now, I didn't point out this at the beginning, so I'll say it now. If you notice, black has these double pawns, on the queen side, and generally compromised pawn structure. It's not that bad. He's not losing or nothing. Like I said, theory holds the exchange variation is, pretty drawish. But he does have these double pawns on the queen side, and white has a nice pawn structure, right? No weaknesses. So what does black have in compensation, or to weigh the to even out the scale, so to speak, for his weakened pawn structure? He has the two bishops. So normally it's good for black to try to hold on to the two bishops as long as possible. Either he'll give up one of the bishop pair at some point, doubling or damaging white structure, or he'll hold on to the bishop pair, and that will be his compensation. And it's usually very difficult to fight against the bishop pair, especially as the position opens up. What is white's plan in this opening in general? His plan is really straightforward, and that's one of the reasons why it has a drawish reputation. Also because the plan is pretty simple, and it's to create a 4-3 pawn majority on the king side. That's what white is trying to do. Many years ago, former world champion Max Erva did a study of the end game that often rises in this opening, and concluded that white is winning. Right? That's if you just make it a pure king and pawn ending. So that's basically White's strategy. Is he has this he damages Black's pawn structure, and he just basically judiciously trades off pieces, keeps his structure intact, and then we get down to an end game where he has this pawn majority on the king side. He creates a passed pawn, and he wins the game. The ending is very similar to that of the Berlin Wall ending, where White has a 4-3 majority, pawn majority on the king side, and as the pieces gradually get traded off, White has this dangerous passed pawn that he tries to create. So the plan is pretty one-dimensional, but it can be very effective to opponent that slips up. Against an opponent that slips up. Excuse me. All right. So B3 is played back to this game. And let me point out the other idea of B3 is that it puts knight C4 back on the map because now the C4 square is enforced by the pawn on B3. Okay, because I mentioned that the bishop on C1 now protects the knight, but I forgot to mention that White is now threatening to play knight c4 again and snatching up this e5 pawn. Knight e7 by Richard Rapport, and the idea is simply to anticipate the knight coming here to c4 and to meet that with knight g6, which protects the pawn. So knight c4, knight g6. And now things come to a head. There's basically two moves here that can be played. Bishop b2. Again, put more pressure on there. Black would just respond with f6. And the move that was played during the game. d4. So now Black is faced with the choice of either trying to defend or give up his center. He can't play a move like bishop d6 and try to strong point the center or hold on to it. This could be meant by bishop b2, putting more pressure on the center, and then say after f6, d takes e5, f takes e5, and maybe queen d2, uniting these rooks. And White still, I think White stands a little, a tad bit better. Right, he still maintains his pristine pawn structure. Black still has his two bishops, but Black is a little bit behind in development, and there's a lot of pressure on this e pawn. In the game, Rapport gave up his center and played e takes d4. This was meant by knight takes d4, and now White has an advantage in space here. Queen g4, offering a trade of queens. Now, when I first looked at the game, my immediate thought was just play f3 here. But I understand that f4 is definitely a move that White usually wants to play here. And going into the end game is part of White's strategy anyway. So I understand why Caruana just simply kept developing and played bishop b2. And now this is a good time to point out this 4-3 majority on the king side, because now you can see it clearly. This is White's plan. He wants this position, but he wants this position with no pieces on the board. He would just like a pure king and pawn ending. And again, maybe I'll show the study one day, but Max Oive a long time ago showed that was a win for White. But again, this, you don't usually get to just a pure king and pawn ending. It's usually pieces on the board, a knight or a bishop or something. But that gives you kind of the strategy, overriding strategy to go by in the back of your mind as you're playing. f6. Why f6? There's all type of tactics here with this bishop on b2. On this diagonal here. So, I don't know. Let's just make some type of random random move here. And then you can see the bishop hops out. Let's say queen takes g4, bishop takes g4, and knight f5, for example. You see, now you have this pawn attack, g7 pawn that is attacked 2 times. And, it's difficult to deal with the subsequent threats. So let's say, for instance, bishop takes f5, e takes f5. So now you've given up the bishop here as black. That was basically a compensation for having a messed up pawn structure. Now you're giving that up. The knight is attacked on g6, and this pawn is still attacked. All right, so there's a lot of stuff going on there, and that's why Caruana played bishop b2 also. All right, so Rapport played f6, which was a good move. f4 by Caruana, and we see now why he didn't play f3. He wanted to play f4. Besides gaining more space, it restricts this knight from coming to e5 down the road. Bishop c5, h3, and now we have this end game. All right. What I liked about the h3 move also, besides encouraging the endgame, is that it's difficult for this bishop to have a meaningful place to go to right now. And with this bishop on c8, it also holds back this rook. King f7. King h1, just getting out of this this pin here. And rook e8. Why rook e8? Well, it develops a piece and challenges this e pawn, right, which is unprotected. There's a couple of choices here. e5. Caruana chose f5. It's a good move. I like this move because of the damage that will be done to the structure here if black played knight e5. Now, the proper move here is is probably to suck it up and play knight f8, and then allow this e5 move where white still stands better after f takes e5 and knight f3, right? And then say e4, knight g5 check. All right, so white still stands a little bit better here because of his pawn structure. All right, but these two bishops, right, will soon make themselves felt as the position becomes more and more open. But it's still very difficult here, as you can see the denuded black king in the corner. So that's why I say white, it still stands better here. But knight f8 was probably a better move than in the game. In the game, after f5, knight e5 was played, and I must admit it's a natural looking move, but I'm concerned about this bishop here on b2. Knight takes e5 check, and the problem is with a move like f takes e5, knight f3, and say bishop d6, look what happens to the black pieces. He has the two bishops, but the bishops are very, very passive, right? The position takes on a closed nature, which is anathema to the two bishops. And this plays into white's hands. He has a nice pass pawn here. And again, right now, it's not, that much of a threat, but later on in the game, as we continue to make moves, this pawn will become annoying. After moves like g4 and this slow march forward with the pawns as the end game, looms. And then notice the passive position of this bishop right here, d6, right? And White's plans are very simple. Ideas like G4 come to mind, and then also C4 followed by B4 and C5, just knocking this guy away from the defense of this pawn right here. So this is a difficult position for black. This explains Rapport's next move. Instead of knight takes e5, instead of f takes e5, he took with the rook. Rook takes e5. And, still has this idea of taking this pawn. If this bishop wasn't here, it would be all right. Caruana plays knight e6, which is very provocative move because now he threatens to win the exchange here, and at the same time he's threatening this this bishop. So this move does everything that white wants in one move. That's why I like it so much. See, first of all, just note that rook takes e4 is not possible because the knight, knight is just hanging. So that's out the window. But this move does everything. This takes away all of black's compensation for his damaged pawn structure. Remember how I mentioned the bishop here earlier. So now he's forced to give up. He's forced to he's not forced to give up the bishop here, but if he wants to try to save this rook somehow, which he really can't. Another thing is White's back pawn is backward on e4, but it can't be captured. And it's just one of those things where it's not really a weakness. It just looks like a weakness. And I find that interesting about chess. There's a lot of things that are considered weaknesses, but if you can't exploit them in the game that you're playing, then they're not a weakness at all. So Rapport does what he has to do here, and he gives up the exchange. Rook takes e6. Now, as far as I'm concerned, black is pretty much busted here strategically. It's only 18 moves, and in a system in this exchange, Ruy Lopez, that's considered drawers. He's already busted to me in 18 moves. F takes e6, B takes e6, rook d3. So now you have all kind of ideas of doubling up on the e file, on the d file. Excuse me. That white has done that much, and he just simply outplayed his opponent. So now his Rapport trying to hang on. He plays h5, and his idea is basically to try to drum up some kind of kingside counterplay. Notice the bishop on c5 kind of locks the king off there. So Rapport's idea is basically to try to fix his quote-unquote weakness here and hopefully get his bishop to d5 at some point and harass the king on h1. So we'll see that idea in the next few moves. So h5 is played, and now bishop e5. Great move by Caruana, exploiting the pin. Right, you see the rook on f1, king on f7. This capture is impossible, and he's threatening to win this pawn. Why not? Rook c8. Now, what I like about the move, and these are those little subtleties that I was talking about, is Caruana repositions his pieces. So he knows that some type of assault is, going to come on the king side, so he gets his bishop over there. You see, he moves his bishop to a better diagonal. This diagonal is kind of blocked off, so he gets his bishop to a better diagonal. Another thing to notice is how Rapport's rook on c8, how he forces it to be passive. That's a great thing. If you can figure out ways to force your opponent's pieces in a passivity, depriving them of good squares to go to, it would be very hard for them to win. This rook is can't really contribute to the game in a meaningful way, being tied down to the defense of a backward pawn. Let's go on. King e7. So the idea, of course, is just getting out of this wicket pin. e5. I love this move because black with this king in the middle like that really can't afford to open up the position. I mean, it's too much. I mean, bishop h4 check can be played. Bishop takes e5. There's just too much going on, right? With all of these open files, so he can't afford to play a move like that. So he plays f5. So he keeps the position closed. And friends, that is a symptom of a bad position. When you have to do moves that kind of go against the context and nature of your position, that should let you know that you're in a bad position. And what do I mean by that? This move f5, keeping the position closed, goes against the nature of black's position. Why? Because black has the bishop pair. You have the bishop pair. You want the board to be open, right? You want to do things that are going to exacerbate and enhance the power and effectiveness of the two bishops. So in a perfect world, Rapport wants to open the position, but he can't because he has other factors that diminish the advantage of the two bishops in a way that he better keep the position closed or risk losing material and even getting his king in a mating attack. So therefore, he has to do a move in f5 that he really would prefer not to do. Bishop h4 check. And now black is faced with kind of messed up choice. Either he has to return to the f file, which is basically going back into the opposition with the rook on f1, which he tried to avoid in the first place, or he has to go back to the 8th rank, which destroys any possibility of the rook on c8 getting into the game. So he chooses the latter. He goes to king f7. So now he's back into the pin. Rook d8. Now why rook d8? Well, Caruana just simply wants to win that pawn on c7. So rook d8, bishop e3, and all of white's moves, all of black's moves are just a bit too slow. These ideas of playing here and stuff like that. So rook takes c8, bishop takes c8, and now just bishop d8. Bishop e6, just blockading the pawn with the bishop and freeing up the king. Now you might say, well, why didn't he just protect the pawn on c7? He could have done that. He could have did that if he wanted to. There's nothing wrong with that move. He's still, like I said, in dire straits. And as I mentioned earlier, I believe that black was pretty much busted after he lost the exchange earlier. Again, just a sample variation there. So Rapport, those of you familiar with this playing style, he likes to play aggressive and provocative, and he's not really the type to try to defend the pawn like that. So bishop d8, bishop e6, and his idea basically here with bishop e6, besides wanting to free the king up to move, is to he would love to be able to get his pawn here or even here to keep these pawns from being able to move. In other words, weakening the complex. See, because if you get a pawn on b5, then notice a4 or c4 cannot be played. All right, and you want to do that in chess, is restrict the possibilities of your opponent. That's why moves like h4, for instance, for black. Of course, he can't do it now, but they restrict the possibilities for the white pawns, because say if he did advance, then there would be some type, en passant capture, what have you, and then you have a weak h pawn. So h4, and notice Caruana is doing the same thing. So notice how this pawn is just like stuck back here, and you have this big hole on g5 now. This weakness on G5 renders the F pawn and H pawn weak. Caruana plays B5. Notice he just simply just gave up that pawn. He didn't think it was worth defending. And now that the bishop moves away from the D8 and to H4 diagonal, Rapport decides to get rid of the weakness. However, after H takes G5, notice what's left. You have these two weak pawns. King G6, of course, bishop takes G5 is perfectly playable. Now he plays bishop D8. H4, here's some desperation by Rapport here. Again, the idea is just to play bishop D5 and then try to play here somehow exploiting this, the pin. And this is where you can see the idea of stopping C4 comes in handy, because now he can put his bishop here without worrying about C4. Rook D1, what's the idea? It's just to simply play this. Either picking up the pawn or picking up the bishop. This will force, a move like that. And then white could just check or something and win this bishop. This forces bishop C5 to guard the D6 square. C3. The idea is to play B4 and knock this guy off the diagonal somehow. And then you can play rook to D6. Bishop D5. So Rapport goes along with his plan. He just wants to play H3. B4. Bishop F8. The only way to stay on the diagonal. And notice with the bishop on D5, the black, white rook not able to penetrate, and he's ready to execute his quote-unquote threats, which is not really a big deal. King H2, just avoiding all of that jazz. F4. King H3. Fabiano Caruana can just afford to give up the pawn, which he does. Bishop takes A2. But again, Fabio Caruana is a very deliberate player, and he's not giving up something for nothing. After bishop takes A2, rook A1, we see that this pawn will drop. Bishop goes back to D5, rook penetrates to A6. King F5. Notice how many pins come up during the game. Again, you have another pin situation here. King F5. Threatening the E5 pawn. Bishop to F6. Excuse me. C5. Rapport just simply ran out of moves and ideas in this position. B takes C5. Bishop takes C5, and now G6, and Rapport resigned. The idea behind G6 is again the good old pin motif. If king takes G6, then you have this discovery of bishop E7 check from the rook, which would win this bishop right here.